But I want to welcome our next speaker up on stage. Okay, so our next speaker is going to be talking all about customer interviews. So customer interviews are so important to product marketing, and I think it's one of those things that no one really takes the time to actually learn how to do properly. And so I'm really interested for this next session. Our speaker is currently the Senior Manager of Product Marketing of Corporate Solutions at Relativity. She holds an MBA from the Kellogg School of Management, and she's passionate about understanding the market and finding the most effective and resonant ways to communicate with customers. Help me welcome to the stage, Amelia Chen.
Thanks, yes. Okay. Can everyone hear me? Okay, cool. I understand I'm the only thing between you and drinks, so I'll try to make this worth your while. If it's not worth your while, just tell me to get off stage or something. I don't know. Okay. So my name is Amelia Chen. I lead product marketing for one of our key customer segments over at Relativity. We are a legal and compliance software company. And I'm here today to talk about how we can get from good to great in our customer interviews. There's something missing there, but it's okay. Do I have to point this at something? Okay, cool. All right, if I were to ask you about a really good interview experience you've had before, what comes to mind? I'm not talking about like a customer interview or you being interviewed as a customer. I'm talking about you interviewing for a job. What was that experience like? And probably what comes to mind is that it was a comfortable conversational experience, right? It felt smooth, it felt open, it felt like you could really share your experiences with your interviewer, and it felt like you were being heard. And if I were to ask you about a meh interview experience, what was that like? Probably a little awkward. They're probably asking you really boring questions like, what are your strengths and what are your weaknesses? And tell me about a time you failed, right? It's kind of meh. And I kind of liken my meh experiences and interviews to something like this. So for all the Friends fans out there, you all know this episode, where it felt really awkward. It was kind of like pulling teeth. I wasn't really vibing with that person, and I really wanted it to end. And I was like, I probably don't want to work here, right? But a really good interview experience is something like this. And this is probably an over-exaggeration, right? We don't want to be best friends with our interviewer, but it felt really open. It felt like we were on the same page. We probably have the same core values. I could share my experiences with you, and you totally get what I'm saying. We're really vibing. And this is what a good, great experience feels like. And so what I want to go through is this kind of experience and environment that we're trying to create. That's the kind of environment that I look to create, an open experience, an environment where they can really share their insights and thoughts with me without being judged. And this goes for any interview that we're doing, right? Our win-loss interviews, product feedback, discovery, market validation, et cetera. It doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, you're talking to a real live person and they want to feel like you're treating them like a person and not like somebody that you have to interview because you need to get some insights and whatever, right? Treat them like a person. So what's really important here, ooh, you can still hear me? Okay. This is really important because open and honest conversations like this are just dripping with insights. And these are the insights that's really gonna supercharge your product marketing work. These are the insights that are just waiting to be uncovered that your competitors are not even gonna get to because you're really good at customer interviews. And so I think this is the trick to up-leveling how we conduct our customer interviews is by creating sort of a conversational atmosphere. And I think we forget that when we do customer interviews, it's sort of a two-way street, right? In the same scenario in which you're interviewing for a job, I think companies oftentimes forget that we're assessing if we want to even work for you, right? Do I like you? Do I like your team members? Is this the kind of company that I want to associate myself with? And your customers are doing the exact same thing. They're thinking in the back of their minds do I like this person? Are they even listening to me? Because that can only add or subtract from the brand equity that you've already built with them. And that's really important. And so what we want to do is create this kind of open environment in which they feel like they can really share with you because they're being listened to and heard and seen. So most conversations, I think, are kind of like this. They're linear, right? We create a sort of set of questions, things we want them to answer, things we want to learn. But what we're trying to do is create a conversation that's something like this, where it's sort of following the path of where we want to go, but we're creating this space to uncover additional possibilities and insights that maybe we haven't thought of before. So before we do that and go into how we can put some practices into place, I wanted to set the foundation for what good looks like. And I think everybody in this room probably knows what good looks like because we're really good at our jobs. All right, so the first thing, establish what we know and what we don't know. Be honest with ourselves and write it down and figure out what your learning agenda is. Figure out what your objective is in these customer interviews. Second is creating an interview guide. You've got your list of questions, you're all set, you're ready to go. Third, you're interviewing the customer or prospect. Fourth, you're reflecting on your learnings, you're synthesizing them, and you're sharing them with your key stakeholders across the company. All right, so that's what good looks like. Does anybody know what this is from? Movie trivia. What was that? Arrival, yes. It's a fantastic movie. If you haven't seen it, go watch it. I'm not gonna ruin it for you. It's a really pet peeve of mine when people like ruin movies. Someone ruined the new Spider-Man movie for me recently, and I was like really mad about it. If you guys haven't seen Spider-Man, you gotta watch it. All right, so I'm not gonna spoil the plot, but a theme throughout this movie, I think is relentless curiosity, right? Amy Adams' character, don't remember what her name is, she's so curious around figuring out like what's going on, and that's what really pushes the plot forward and gets us to our conclusion. So, curiosity is one of our first C's. Curiosity is really important because it really helps us stray from that linear conversation. And what I believe is like sort of that area under the curve, if you remember from our calculus days, like this is where those rich insights are. It's not where the interview guide takes us. And I think if we are so dogmatic about sticking to our interview guide, we're not gonna create space and allow ourselves to uncover these really rich insights that are only gonna help our stakeholders and our customers. So how do we put this into practice? So the first thing is allowing yourself to stray from that interview guide. It's okay if you're curious about a thing, and if you want to ask them a question that's not on your interview guide, be unapologetic about it. This is your customer interview, and these are insights you want to learn about. And the interesting thing about is that we want to make sure we pose our unscripted questions in a very specific but vague way. So what I mean by that is, we have a tendency, well, I have a tendency, I don't know if others have this, but I fall into a trap of like asking leading questions. And I think we ask leading questions because of two things. One, because we have a hypothesis of what your answer is gonna be. Like we've conducted all these interviews, we're like, okay, your answer is probably gonna be either option A or option B. And so I'm gonna ask the question that way, right? Like, oh, did you react this way because of A or B? The other reason why I think we ask leading questions unintentionally is because, and I fall into this trap all the time, where I'm in a customer interview and I know I wanna ask a question, but I don't know how I wanna frame it yet. And so when it comes time for me to ask the question, I'm just like sort of spilling out my words, and it turns into a leading question. And that's how that goes, but we really wanna try to avoid that and keep your questions purposely vague. So as an example, right, let's say I'm interviewing someone about ice cream, and I really wanna know how they consume their ice cream. And so I might ask them like, okay, so like, tell me about your ice cream consumption practices. I go, okay, well, you know, I eat my ice cream, and I also lick my ice cream. I consume it really quickly, and I'm like, okay, that's a new one, because people typically either eat their ice cream or lick it or maybe something else, right? And so I might say something like, okay, well, tell me more about that. And they might say like, well, I eat it really quickly, and so I do both, right? I eat it and I lick it. I'm like, okay, so I'll check the eat box and I'll check the lick box, and I'll move on. But the thing is, if we ask a question in a very different way, like, well, how do you eat your ice cream? Like, tell me more about that. And keeping it purposely vague, it creates the space for them to go beyond that and tell me more about their ice cream consumption habits. So if I'm like, okay, well, how are you eating your ice cream? Like, tell me more. And they might say something like, oh, well, you know, I get 3 flavors. I really like chocolate and strawberry and green tea ice cream. And I really like licking my chocolate ice cream, but I eat my green tea and strawberry ice cream like really quickly. I'd be like, okay, that's interesting. Never heard that one before. Tell me more about that. And then they might say something like, well, you know, chocolate ice cream really reminds me of my childhood, makes me really happy. So I really want to savor this chocolate ice cream moment. But I also really like green tea and strawberry. And so I have to eat it really fast because otherwise everything melts, and I really hate gooey ice cream. And like, that's a more jam-packed answer than you were anticipating, right? But because you asked that question of like how, it really lets them open up and tell you more about their behaviors. And that's interesting, right? Because what you could do with that information is say, okay, well, interesting. There's this correlation between chocolate ice cream and like happy childhood memories. Chances are if this person is feeling that way, then there might be other people who are like him who also associate happy childhood memories with chocolate ice cream. And what does that mean? Does that mean we can Maybe think of a different form factor for chocolate ice cream. Maybe this is a new messaging campaign that we can put out there that sort of associates happy childhood with chocolate, like all these different ideas. But we want to make sure that we create that space for these different ideas and different stories by making sure we ask those like open questions, which leads me to my next thing. Is open-ended questions and clarifying questions are your best friends. So the what's, the why's, the how's, these are amazing questions to ask your customers. Keep them purposely vague, and just like a warning there, sometimes your conversations might stray and you're like, okay, I need to bring it back. That's okay. You are in control of the conversation. You can always bring it back. Third, around curiosities. So this is my favorite one. I think panelists earlier said like we're in a constant state of discovery. Listen for anomalies. If your customer is describing a challenge or some feedback or a product feature in different languages, different words, they're describing it in a different way, or maybe they're saying something completely different, like a new use case, pay attention to that and explore them, because chances are it might contribute to a new product feature, it might be a new use case that you need to focus on. And if they're describing these challenges in a very specific way, it's possible that there's a whole cohort of other people who describe it that way, and that means we need to message to them in a very specific way, in a way that resonates with them. So really important to listen to anomalies. Okay, so we're probably all conducting our interviews online, right? Probably over Zoom, Teams, Google, whatever. And so I just wanted to sprinkle in some video best practices, because these are very specific to how we're conducting our interviews today. So first one around curiosity is being mindful of your facial expressions. When we're interviewing customers, they're looking at our face and they're paying attention to what we're doing with our facial expressions. And if we're bored, it's going to show. If we're not interested, it's going to show. And I know that sounds so obvious, but like I've seen this in practice where like the interviewer seems really bored, or they're like eating their lunch, or they're like doing something with their hair. And I'm like, this is so distracting. Like, what are you doing? And they pay attention to that, and it really distracts from our conversation and my ability to share my insights with you as a customer. Okay, second movie trivia question. Where is this from? Yes, such a good movie. If you haven't seen it, please watch it. This like soundtrack is just like, I'm listening to it on repeat right now, and it's amazing. So this and probably every other Disney movie is a really good example of what compassion looks like. So without spoiling it too much, our protagonist, right, is in a family. She's kind of like an outsider, and that family is faced with a challenge that really affects them. So she has to reach across those lines to try to help them solve that challenge, and it really demonstrates not only empathy, but a genuine willingness to help. The other compassion example that I wanted to throw out there is like, and I'm sure we've all been here. We're like standing in an elevator, we've had a really long day, and I'm just like, oh, I just want to get back to my apartment. And like the doors are closing, and you see someone running, and they're like, hold the door, and you're like, So it's like, do you keep it open, or are you like, you're pressing the close button real fast, right? We have 100% all been there. So, second is compassion. Why is compassion important? Compassion is the key to strengthening our answers, around the quality of our answers. Why? Because if a customer believes that you are genuinely interested in understanding their challenges and that you are in a position to help, they're going to be more forthcoming with you. Like if I'm talking to someone and like I don't really think that they care about my problems or they can help me or whatever, I'm just going to give them like nonsense answers or basic answers and like let's be done with it. But if it's really forthcoming that you really care about their challenges, you really want to learn, and you're so in a position to help and you want to do everything you can to help them with their problems, they're going to be more willing to share everything and anything there is about whatever it is that you're asking about. Okay, putting this into practice. So demonstrating an understanding of the challenges they face. So chances are, if you're talking to a customer, you're probably pretty familiar with the challenges they face, and you've heard this before. And this is really useful. So in a customer interview, we want to make sure that they're talking like 99% of the time, right? We're staying quiet, we're listening, we're learning. But it's also important, like throughout the interview, just to say, okay, yeah, so I totally hear you. You're saying that because of this feature, your HR team spends less time explaining the benefits to your employees, right? Great. And sometimes it can look like maybe you're parroting what they're saying back to you, but this is important because it demonstrates that you're listening to what they're saying and that you totally understand their challenges. And so you can even reframe what they've said to you in a completely different way, but to them, you're building trust with them, and they're like, okay, yeah, this person gets it. I'm going to keep going. I can tell them more about this issue that I'm facing in even more detail. The second piece is being empathetic and open to feedback around your product. So sometimes when they're telling us about issues they have with our product, it can be really easy for us to get defensive because let's say we've had a big hand in deciding the product roadmap. We recommended these product features, and someone may be like, well, you know, this is on the product roadmap because X, Y, Z. I would recommend refraining from that because we're here to listen and to learn. And sometimes they just want an audience, right? They just want to be heard. They just want to be listened to. And so if you're really interested in sort of sharing the rationale of your product feedback with them, schedule it for a different call. This call is for you to listen and to learn. Third piece is be an active listener. I know it's like so obvious, but this wouldn't be up here if I hadn't seen this not be in practice. So stay engaged, nod along, your camera's on, right? So just make sure that like they can see you being super engaged and super excited about learning whatever it is that they have to share. Okay, our video best practice. So this one is camera on. I know this is really hard because a lot of us have back-to-back meetings and like it's so exhausting. But this is really important. And even if their camera is off, we keep our cameras on because they decided to show up today, spend 30 to 45 minutes, an hour of their time with us for our benefit. We want to make sure that we're staying committed to them, we're engaged, we're there, and we're like sitting in front of our computer or whatever, and we're super engaged. And again, like, I would be saying this if I hadn't seen this in real life, like, let's not slump over our couches and be like, oh, I don't really want to be here, or like be on our beds, or we're kind of like in our hoodie. I've totally seen all these things before. Please let's avoid that. We're sitting upright on our desk, making sure that like we're here, we're present, we're taking notes, we're super active and engaged. All right, that's compassion. Okay, last one. I think we all know what this one is. Such a good movie. Deadpool is known for breaking the fourth wall, right? Being really conscious about his surroundings and understanding that, like, you know, there's like an audience back there. And the reason why consciousness in this perspective is important is that we want to be aware of how we're coming off to our interviewee and aware of the presence. And I know that sounds obvious. Like, obviously, we're aware of their presence. We're talking to them. But this is important because there are different signals that we give to show how we're reacting in the moment. So this is important because it helps us keep the conversation going. If we're super aware of how we're coming off and we make sure that we're removing any distractions or barriers they have to giving us their entire attention and understanding that we're there to listen to them, it's going to continue the conversation, right? They're going to continue to go. And they're going to be like, okay, this person has totally listened to me. They're super engaged. I'm going to tell them everything they need to know about making this product better. But I want to make a quick point here. I know this is like, maybe we're overthinking this customer interview thing a little bit. Like, why are we putting so much energy? Because it's kind of emotional, right? And the thing is, like, I don't know, B2B business, how is it emotional? It definitely is. If we're in B2B, or B2C for that matter, like, oftentimes our value propositions are probably like, we can save you money, we can save you time, we're going to remove those frictions for you. We're going to get you less frustrated. We're a little bit happier, maybe set you up for that promotion. Yay. Those are all emotional things. And if you can think of any enterprise solution you've used recently that was like a little bit frustrating to use, which I'm sure we all have a really good example of that. And like, let's say that enterprise solution provider wants to get on the phone with us. They want to learn about our feedback. If I feel like you're not really paying attention to me, or if I feel like you're like off somewhere else, I'm not going to really tell you all my pains around this product because you don't really care, right? But if I believe that you're here, you're staying engaged, you're in a position to help me, I'm going to tell you everything there is to know about my problems with your product and why I think my ideas are going to help you solve my challenges, right? And that's what you want. So how do we keep this in mind and put this into play? So the first one is, and I know this is obvious, but you know, I've seen this not being held in practice, acknowledge what they're saying. If they say something, little things like, got it, interesting, cool, like things like that are really gonna help. Otherwise, it's gonna feel like they're speaking to a black void. And if they feel like they're not being heard, then it's just like, what's the point? Is anyone listening to me? Like, what's happening? And I've definitely seen this before where it's sort of like interrupts the flow of the conversation a little bit and then it gets distracting. So little things like, cool, those are super helpful. Second, little bits of encouragement and appreciation go a long way, also participation. things like, oh, thank you for saying that. Really appreciate you sharing that with me. Because oftentimes these things that they're sharing, they might not even be things that they should be sharing with you, right? But because you've built that foundation of trust, you have that relationship going on, they can feel like they can share this information with you. And a lot of times in our customer interviews, they'll be like, oh, don't tell my boss I said that. And like, great, obviously you won't. But that's really important insight that you just got, that they decided to share with you because they feel like they have that relationship with you. And third is watch their facial expressions. If they're talking about something that's super interesting or they're like really animated about it, ask them more about that thing because they've clearly spent a lot of time and energy around this particular topic that they want to dive into. So just go into that. You can always bring it back if we stray too far from the conversation. And you can say things like, oh, that's really interesting, but I want to go back to what you said before. Can we revisit that? And just continue the conversation from there. Okay, our video best practice. So this is my favorite one because it's not really intuitive and it takes some getting used to, but it makes such a big difference. Look at the camera when you're talking to your customers. It's weird, right? Like when we're in our Zoom meeting or Teams meeting or whatever, we're like looking at the person in our monitor, and it just looks like I'm talking to you like here, right? But you're over here. It's like a little weird. But that's not how we engage with people in real life. When we're talking to each other in real life, I'm like looking at you, eye contact. This is how we're doing it. And that's the kind of environment we want to create for our customers, right? We want to make sure that they feel like I'm engaging with you directly. So you look at the camera. And the thing is, we're compromising our comfort a little bit for their sake, but it's worth it because it makes them feel like we're engaging with them. Like there's a reason why news anchors stare at the camera, not like somewhere else, right? Because they want to make sure you feel like you're engaging with them directly. Second piece is right-sizing your image. So it's a little off-putting if like my face is like this big and yours is like this big, right? It's like, ooh. But so in the very first few seconds of your meeting, try to right-size yourself, like push your laptop back or adjust your image or whatever. Just try to make it a little bit equal so it's a little bit like less disconcerting and a little bit less distracting. Okay, so those are the 3 C's, but before we wrap up, I want to just share some other best practices with you that I think are really helpful. And first one is just thanking them. I know this is a given, but again, I've seen this where we haven't done this, and I'm like, oh, why? Thank them for their time and make sure they feel appreciated. And then also in that same breath, set expectation for a follow-on, because in your debrief, you might think like, oh, I totally want to go down this path, didn't think about it before, I want to ask them more about this particular topic. So when you ask them for that follow-on, they're already primed for it because they're very busy. It's hard to get on their calendars. So if you prime them for it, they say yes, they've already committed to it, it's going to be easier to get on the calendars. Third is reflection. So yes, this is a given, but I think what's harder for us to do is to make sure we do it. So I always put a 15-minute blocker on my calendar to ensure that I'm reflecting on the conversation I just had, or maybe this is a debrief with my team. And I do this because I have a horrific memory. And so if I had a customer interview at like 10 a.m., I'm going to forget like 80% of everything we talked about by 5. And so for me, it's like a race against time. I have to write everything down, all the impressions that I had, the feelings that I had, the takeaways that I had down before I forget them at the end of the day. So blocking your calendar and protecting it is really key. And the last thing is sharing. So of course, when we're doing these customer interviews, we want to make sure we share our key insights with all of your cross-functional stakeholders, whether it be in Slack or email or in like a more formal presentation, like a deck or Word doc or whatever, but it's super important. But I think the other important piece here is like, we're all leaders in this room, right? And I think one of the most important things to being a leader is ensuring that all your key stakeholders feel like they're looped into whatever it is that you're doing. And even if it's just maybe 10% relevant to the workload, they're going to appreciate you saying like, oh, hey, learned about this in a customer interview, thought of you, like quick Slack, takes 2 seconds. But it makes such a big difference because as humans, we all just want to be looped in, right? We just want to be a part of this thing that you're doing. And so that goes a long way in building your brand and your company. Just to shoot them a quick note, tell them what you learned. Could be relevant for them, could be not, but it goes a long way. All right, so to wrap up, first C is relentless curiosity. To keep us from being too tight around our interview guides and to make sure we create space for the different possibilities that'll open us up to different use cases, different messaging ideas, different content ideas, et cetera. Second is around authentic compassion, making sure that We not only have empathy for the challenges that our customers are facing, but we really want to help them. Third is having deliberate consciousness, being self-aware of how you're coming off, and you're perceiving them as a true, unique person, and you want to make sure that they don't feel like the 9th interview that you've had that day. They're their own unique interview and person, and you're treating it as such. And that's all I got. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. Oh.
That was awesome. Thanks, Amelia. Got time for some questions?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Okay, tips on synthesizing interview information and reporting out, identifying actionable insights, etc.
Ooh, that's such a good question. When I put up our docs together, it's always like, if I were a CEO, I have like 2 seconds to spend on your document, how would I like this document to be structured? So highlights at the top, right? So like, what are the 3 key things that you learned that were so interesting? And then further down in the doc, it's like, well, what implication does it have for your commercial, your product, your customer success, et cetera? And the thing is, like, when you're structuring these documents, it's really easy just to put everything on there. I'm like, okay, go read it. But it's really hard for an executive to really absorb that insight, right, if everything's like buried. So it is okay if your synthesis takes a couple of cycles. Mine always do. But you want to make sure you're putting it, like, presenting it in a way that's right for an executive brief. So think of it that way, and also like make sure you loop in your stakeholders too to get their input.
Cool. Yeah, that was great. So I think one thing we learned today is that product marketers have a lot on their plate.
Yes.
How much do you, and how much do you suggest that people carve out for customer interviews?
I kind of lump them into, like, we use Gong. I don't know if you guys use Gong. It records a lot of our sales calls. We always spend, I want to say, like 30 to 40% of our week on learning about the customer. That includes Gong, that includes customer interviews. And I mean, that's a stretch sometimes too, right? Because we're so busy that it's like 30, 40%, what are you talking about? But that's the goal. So that's
30 to 40% of your time on customer interviews. That's awesome. Yeah, that's good.
Try. It's an aspirational goal.
Yeah. How have you most successfully socialized your research insight?
I think you have to force it sometimes. So we recently uncovered a big use case for one of our customer segments, and institutionally we didn't really have a keen understanding around how this use case played out in the market, how our customer segment thought about it. And so we kind of forced it upon the company. So we put together this deck that synthesized what this thing is, why it's so important, what's the TAM, what's our ability to address this market, what's our product fit for that today. And we forced our executives into a room and we're like, look at this thing, this is really important, here's why, and here's our plan around it. And so sometimes you just have to do that, and then you make sure that all your enablement materials are ready, right? Your sales stuff, your customer success stuff, everything is ready to go, because after you train them on this thing, they're gonna be like, okay, I'm ready to go to market with it. Like, where's all my stuff? So make sure all of that stuff is ready before you go, otherwise you're gonna get pinged from every which way, and that's, yeah.
Nice. One more question?
Yeah.
Cool. How do you balance acknowledging, this is new. How do you balance acknowledging and encouraging the interviewee while not biasing the interviewee in what they say / talk about in an effort to please you?
That's a great question. I think it goes back to not using leading questions, going with the how, tell me more, cool, that's interesting. Any way you can not bias them is really important. So like for that ice cream example, right? If I were like, oh, how do you eat your ice cream? Do you lick your ice cream? Then in their minds, it might be like, well, I guess there's only 2 ways to consume ice cream, and any other way is not right. So I'm just going to pick one of these 2 and go from there. But if you keep it open, like, tell me about it. You know, I've heard all these different ways of like making them feel more comfortable about having an abnormal answer is going to go a long way, and just making them feel comfortable they can share those things with you.
Amelia, this is awesome. Thanks so much. Everyone give it up for Amelia.